I started studying Spanish around 2 years ago, though I have not studied that entire time. Here's how my Spanish sounded before.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español.
Y ahora puedo hablar muchas cosas, puedo hablar con fluidez. You know, I've recently started doing coaching with clients. As I started coaching more and more people, I started realizing this one thing that, especially if you've studied Spanish before, this thing that every single person who initially starts learning Spanish, or any language for that matter, they all have this one tendency. And previously, when I first started learning Spanish, everyone has the desire to learn Spanish. I had this desire to learn Spanish. For me, it was a competitive desire to essentially just be the best in my class. And so previously, I tried. We had a Spanish class in school. I studied that. I also did Duolingo for a few weeks, and all of that. None of it really worked. And we both know that doesn't work. My Swedish teacher told me a story of this student who had studied French for 8 years, and then when he went to Paris, he could read some of the signs, but he literally could not speak or understand any bit of French. And that just shows Duolingo and the school system, the way the conventional way of teaching works, it does literally not work at all. And I found that there's one trait, one tendency that noobs, beginners all struggle with. But even people who have been studying for years and they've been trying to get fluent, they all have this one tendency that really, really messes up their ability to learn at all. You see, when I started learning, at least the person I am actually, I've always been a very logical person, and I always followed set rules. So for example, maths. I'm very good at maths because math is literally just a set rules and your ability to use those rules and use that concept in another equation. So for example, the answer of a division multiplied by the denominator of the division thing equals the top thing, the I don't know what it's called. So for example, that's a rule. Now with that rule, it can apply to thousands of different equations. That rule itself, I've used this so many times. With that in mind, when I started learning Spanish, the regular method of memorizing words and using Anki to you know what I mean, for large vocabulary lists to know the most common 1,000 words, or for example the Duolingos and the Babbel and these apps and stuff that they just teach you memorization essentially. I never messed with memorization ever because I'd always been the logical person who would rather just learn a rule that applies to everything. And the thing is, humans are just logical creatures that even if you think that you're not good at math, this same concept applies. And actually really reflects on how we learned our own native language. So with this in mind, when I started studying Spanish, the Ankis and Duolingos never really worked for me. And to be honest, they never really worked for you either. If we're going to keep it $1.75, it didn't work for you or me either. But the issue was that I'd made it my goal to get fluent in Spanish. So this was my challenge. In the summer of 22, I made a challenge for myself. Get fluent in Spanish. I told everyone around me I'm going to get fluent in Spanish. So if I didn't do it, it would be very embarrassing. I would be disappointed in myself as well, since you set a goal and you don't even achieve it. That's you lose respect for yourself as well. And so my idea was that I couldn't just drop it. And also I was already sort of interested in learning Spanish anyway. So I discovered these different YouTubers and they learned Spanish in the most it was such a weird method. It was that all they did was learn from real spoken Spanish. They didn't do any Anki memorization. They didn't do any of the basic stuff. They did this different way where they just spoke with natives and they studied native speaking. They studied I saw a YouTuber, he studied native content. Another YouTuber recommended this app called Language Transfer. And so I went into the app, it was a course. And in that course, the guy didn't teach memorization, but rather he taught me certain rules. And this is where I find that a lot of people fail. For me, I found that great. I'd rather just use these rules and essentially just know tons of words because of these rules. And so I did that. I learned all these different rules that apply to Spanish grammar, that apply to Spanish verbs and words. And I essentially just internalized those rules, which essentially just means I practiced those rules and used them. And then eventually I had a list of 10, 15, 20 rules in Spanish that I could use to take my English and transfer it to Spanish. Hence the name Language Transfer. That's why they did that, the name, which is pretty clever of him. Granted, the course is 10 years old, so maybe it's not up to date, but I found it really, really useful. And so fast forward a little, after the summer of 2022, where I took what these YouTubers did and inspired my own method of learning, hyperfixated on it for a month or so, for an hour a day or so. And by the end of it, I was able to have a fluent conversation. I was not like native fluency. I was not extremely fast. I was not like perfect. Like I was not like very quick and like fast spoken, all that. I remember I specifically had like an hour-long conversation with a native speaker. And I've used this now, this story of these methods to, you know, reach out and like make these videos to help people. From those, I've like gotten certain clients, and I've started like teaching these clients, and I'll notice a pattern, especially with students that have started studying Spanish the conventional way, and now are trying to switch to the method of scaling the learner's ladder, which is what I call it. There's a deep tendency in everyone, essentially, in all of us, to just memorize something. And this is a big issue in language learning, because in language learning, you can think about how we learned our own native language. You never memorized a single word, did you? Think about it. Why does it seem like, oh, I was born knowing the language? Why does it seem like that to you now? You know, there's a myth that kids are the best at learning languages. That's absolute garbage, by the way. It's not. Like, several studies have been done. It's a proven fact. Kids are just garbage at learning languages. But somehow, there's still that rumor, that myth, that kids are good at learning languages. And notice, kids never memorized on Anki. They never used Duolingo, right? This is kind of like food for thought, because it started like perplexing my mind, and it got me thinking about, okay, if we never learned our own native language by memorizing, then why would we ever learn another language by memorizing? And clearly, if you're watching this video and you're struggling with learning, like getting fluent in the language, clearly there's something you're doing that's wrong, and something that I was doing that was wrong, which everyone else had been doing, by the way. And notice, like for example, the French student that had been studying for 8 years and it was not even remotely fluent. How is it that I was able to get conversationally fluent in like 120 hours of studying, whereas that French student who had been studying for maybe 1,000, 2,000 hours of studying had still not become fluent? It's because of this tendency, this like ADHD sort of thing, to just directly, to not conceptualize anything, to not think of the rules, but to rather just memorize it. I'll give you an example actually. Yesterday, literally just yesterday, my sister had an ENO test. ENO just means biology. She had a biology test and she needed help to study. So I was trying to explain to her filtration, sedimentation, that's what she was like studying. And I explained to her the concepts of like what it is. And she kept telling me like, okay, but how do I say that? And I gave it into a sentence. And then she was like, okay, write that sentence down. Essentially, she wanted to memorize that sentence. And obviously she did not retain that information at all. Another time, I had a physics test this time, and instead of learning the concepts behind the formulas of like chemical reactions, I just took like a Quizlet and memorized the formulas, like specific formulas. Instead of memorizing the rules of what happens and why it happens, right? There's a difference. There's like, what happens is like the memorization. Okay, this is what it is, boom. But the why behind why it happens gives you the rules. And the person that knows the rules, the tendencies, the concepts, the rules behind why things happen, will always beat the guy who just memorized something. Because would you rather just know the word presentation? Presentation in Spanish is presentación. Boom, there you go. Would you rather just know that? Now you've memorized that. You have one word. But if I taught you the rule that every single word in Spanish, or essentially every word in Spanish, because of Latin roots, every word in English that ends with ation becomes acción. Contemplation, presentation, cancellation, duration, literally so many words that follow that same thing. Now that you know that rule, the why behind presentation becoming presentación, now you know that cancellation becomes cancelación, and that contemplation becomes contemplación, and that duration becomes duración, or that contemplate is contemplar. I didn't memorize that. But I know that because of two rules. The first rule being, you take off the ation in Spanish and put on acción and use Spanish vowels, then you get hundreds of Spanish words that are ends of ation. And also most of them are feminine. Then you take off the acción and you put ar and you get the verb. So let's say you want to say to present. You have presentation, presentación, presentar. Let's say you want to say to visit. Visitation, visitación, visitar. Let's say you want to say to contemplate. Contemplation, contemplación, contemplar. That works for hundreds of words. So look at this one scenario. You memorized one word because you just like used Quizlet and translated it. So that's the what. That's like, oh, okay, you know what presentation is. But then you have, when you understand the why, when you understand that there's a rule behind it, when you understand that it's ation becoming acción and then acción becoming ar, when you know there's a pattern, when you know that there's a rule, when there's a why behind why things happen, You'll just know so much more and it'll be so much easier, because on one hand, you have to memorize thousands of different words. On the other hand, you have to memorize maybe, I don't know, 20, 25 rules, and now you're able to say whatever you want in Spanish. And even so, let's say you want to learn vocabulary. There even is a better way to learn a vocabulary, which I'm not going to go into this video, because that's not what this video is about. I remember when I was coaching clients, I asked my client, for example, what is I have in Spanish from tener? Okay? And he said, tengo. But when I told him, why is that? He doesn't know. He just said it's irregular. And that's the issue right there. When you give up and say, no, it's irregular, I have to memorize it, you're setting yourself up for failure, because you're teaching yourself that you need to just know it. And have you ever found that in like class, especially in like biology class, or like at the end of the day, you just think that, oh, I just have to know it. Oh, how do I know it? All right, let me memorize it. That never works. However, when you know a rule behind it, when you see a pattern, you can like conceptualize into a rule, then it makes so much more sense. And when it makes sense, then you can use the rule, the why, and into everything else, and you can guess. There's a reason why I can guess that cancellation. There's a reason why I know that cancellation becomes cancelación, which becomes cancelar. And that's how you say to cancel. And then from cancelar, I can get I cancelled, he cancelled, we cancelled. All of that, I did not memorize. I just knew a few rules to get there. That's the point I'm trying to get to here. When you know the why behind things, you don't just learn one thing. You learn thousands of variations of that thing. Going back to another client, okay? He said tengo, and I asked him why it would be tengo, and he was like, oh, it's just irregular. And by the way, on websites and stuff, it also says that it's irregular. Then I asked him, okay, how do you say we have from tener? And he got tenemos. I told him, okay, why is he has, tiene, but we have tenemos? Why does it not tenemos? And he didn't know. He just said it's irregular. The issue comes there now is that there's actually a rule. There's a pattern which applies to every single Spanish verb in the present tense. So to why the we form, the nosotros, becomes tenemos instead of tienemos, right? There's a rule to that. There's a concept. There's a why to that, right? But he had such a deep tendency to just give up and say, no, it's irregular. And because of that, if I asked him now again, for example, he doesn't know. Whereas when you know that, okay, there's a rule to it. There's a reason why, because it splits. There's a reason why we have tiene, but then tenemos. There's a reason why we have puedo and then podemos. It's a repeatable pattern. Most people, especially when I one-to-one coach people, they struggle, and really it's not their fault with getting rules down. They have such a deep tendency to give up and just memorize it instead of using the rules. And the main culprit are actually the teachers that are teaching Spanish. Because a student will ask a teacher, okay, why is it that, right? And the teacher will say, oh, that's just how it is, that's just Spanish. And that drills into the student's brain that, oh, I have to memorize it. When in reality, you do not have to memorize anything in Spanish. That's why in my method, I specifically include that I help Spanish learners get fluent in Spanish by climbing the learner ladders without memorizing anything. Memorization does not work. It just simply does not work. You never memorized as a kid when you learned Spanish, did you? I never learned, or whatever your native language was, right? There's one fact of the universe, and that's you and me both learned our own native language. You know how everyone learns their native language? They see a pattern, a rule, right? A why, and then they apply it to everything. And that's why there's kids that, for example, they say over and over again instead of n, like and apple, right? That's a rule that I've seen. For example, in English we have you can't say apple because there's a vowel on apple. The first letter is a vowel. So let's say an apple. No one, let's just be honest, you never memorized the sentence, an apple, right? But let's be honest, you heard being used in some cases and un being used in other cases. You never memorized it at all. You just knew that in some cases it would be this and in other cases it would be that. And then you had a rule. That rule is that you can't have two sounds over and over again. So end wouldn't work. It would have to be un end. Or apple doesn't work. It has to be an apple. But banana works because isn't a vowel. That's a rule that you know. You never memorize sentences. No, we just learned rules, repeatable rules that we've all been able to apply and use. That is how we learned our own native language. And so the deep tendency that everyone has, and for me, this is the number one reason most people never get fluent. It's not because of time, okay? I got fluent in 3 months, okay? It's not because of discipline. I studied less than an hour a day, literally maximum 2 hours a day, okay? It's not because of discipline. even though those are still like contributing factors, the main reason is that you're memorizing words, you're memorizing sentences instead of learning and internalizing Spanish rules. That's the issue. And the problem is that most people aren't introduced to these rules. And the great thing about this is that you don't have to memorize a billion rules either. Obviously, some languages do warrant tons of rules being memorized. Spanish only warrants like, when I say rules, by the way, I mean like patterns. Spanish only really warrants like, I don't know, 10. If you want to get basic fluent, maybe 10, 15. And like native fluency, probably like 30, maybe double that. That's it. And by the way, rules are super simple. For example, I just taught you one right there. Asian to asion, that's one rule. Icol to eco. So chemical will be químico, for example. And stick an O at the end or an A at the end and you'll get the word insecto, insect. And so if you're watching this and you have that tendency, make sure to stop thinking in the world of memorization, in the world of Anki decks, in the world of notes. Never take down notes, never do any of that. Like never memorize on Anki, never write down your like sentences. All of that is complete BS, bro. Because we never learn our native language like that. Unless you're like studying for writing a book, why would you ever want to get fluent in a language by writing it down or by memorizing on Anki when you never learned your native language like that? And so never be afraid to find out why. Don't learn the what. The what is like the simplest thing ever. When I say the what, I mean like just the word itself. The word what in Spanish is que. Boom. There's no rule to that. There's no nothing to that. Just que. Boom. Okay? That is easy. That you're going to be forced to learn that because when you speak Spanish, you're going to use que a million bajillion times. Right? So you don't have to memorize that, for example. You're going to automatically learn that. Just like how we automatically learned our own native language. But words like olas, meaning waves. Like I have a Spanish test in like a few days, right? We have to know like 40, 50 like words about vacations. I have to know the word olas and ir de acampada, okay? I do not need to know those words. I'm never going to use las olas. Never really focus on the what are the words. Focus on why are the words. Why is certain things irregular? And irregularities aren't even, like, people over-exaggerate irregularities. In my own Spanish fundamentals course, which I'm working on right now, which I offer to my clients, which if you're interested in coaching, then it's in the description. In that, I show it very well, where there's 20 irregular Spanish verbs, and you think that you have to memorize all of them. When in reality, you just have to know 4 rules, and they apply to all of them, pretty much. For example, the splitting of the verb, which we went through, where it becomes tiene, or it becomes puedo, or it becomes entiendo instead of entendo, or puedo, or tene, for example. There's a reason why it becomes tiene instead of tene, but there's a reason why it becomes tenemos instead of tienemos. There are rules behind them. There's concepts. When you know that rule, you know every single Spanish verb which applies to that rule. And the reason why that's so powerful is that you don't need to know the what. I don't know every single Spanish word that ends with Asian. I was struggling to think of one. But guess what? When I hear... Oh, actually, let me search it up right now. Hold on. Let me search up words that end with Asian, and I guarantee you I can translate them in Spanish, even though I've never heard of those words. Let's go. Tribulation, tribulación. So to tribulate would be tribular. Let's see if that's correct. Boom, it literally is correct. Tribulation in Spanish is tribulación. I've never ever memorized that in my life. But I did not even know that the word tribulation may have existed. But because I know the why, I now know how to say tribulation in Spanish, tribulación. I swear I'm not cheating, by the way. Let's take another. Graduation, graduación. Let's see if that's correct. Boom, it's correct. Graduación. Institution, institución. Moderation, moderación, moderar, to moderate. What else? Desperation, inspiration, inspiración, inspirar, to inspire. Point being, like, I do not know the what here. Like, I did not know that inspiration became inspiración. I did not know the word itself. I did not know it. But guess what? I know the why behind inspiration becoming inspiración. And then inspiración becoming inspirar. And then inspirar becoming inspiró. And then inspiró becoming inspiramos. And inspirar. All of that comes from rules that I've learned. And when you don't know the rules, when you give up and don't ask the why, when you don't know the why behind anything in Spanish, then you're cooked. Then you won't be able to know anything. Then when you're in a real conversation, the person's going to use concept and you're not going to know anything that the person's saying. If you are interested in learning Spanish through rules and without memorizing anything, through doing my method of climbing the Learn Zero ladders, then I have one-on-one coaching. You can add me on Discord. I have very limited seats left since I'm literally spending one-on-one time. I'll also give you my fundamentals course, which I go deep into the entire Spanish grammar and explain it using rules, not with memorization. The whole goal of the course is to teach you the rules, not to memorize a single word. If you're interested in that, add me on Discord and we'll talk from there. It's in the description. Hope this video helped you, bro. Stay humble.